You can applaud. So good morning. And it's wonderful to see so many familiar faces and to meet new friends as well. I'm going to get right into it because I know that time is short and my little 5-minute cue will come up faster than I know. Very briefly about Tanenbaum, we are a secular, non-sectarian, non-for-profit. Our mission is to combat religious prejudice with a vision of a world where differences are respected. And so in workplaces, that means that people do not have to surrender what they believe, but in workplaces, people have to manage their beliefs and manage their behavior toward one another, that we are not always going to agree, but the ways in which we disagree make the most difference and can have either positive or negative impacts on productivity and on community, which is a recurring theme that we've been hearing. Tanenbaum is a 27-year-old organization, and for a little over 20 of those years, we have been working in the world of addressing, providing tools, resources, and solutions for the unique identity of religion, religious identity, religious belief, and its impact on the workplace. We also work, as you can see on the screen, in education, training teachers in a pedagogy and with resources that we've created. We work in the field of healthcare, where we train medical providers and more non-clinical staff in the ways in which patients and families make decisions, healthcare decisions, that are based in their religious beliefs and practices, and often also in non-faith-based beliefs and practices. And finally, we do work in conflict resolution and peace building, where we identify, study, and raise the profile of individuals who are religiously motivated, working for peace in active conflict zones around the world. And at this point, if you can think of a conflict zone, we pretty much have a peacemaker there. So with all of that said, some very simple goals for my portion of the morning, which is really just to identify the ways in which the corporate religious diversity assessment can advance any of the practices and initiatives that you already have in place around religion, but certainly can provide a starting point if this is not an area that you've done a lot of work around. We'll introduce the tool, but also give you a little bit of snapshots of what does it look like to actually negotiate the tool. Now, there's been a lot spoken about already this morning about the business case for addressing religious diversity. And at Tanenbaum, we really talk about it more from the perspective of proactively addressing the dimension of religion and religious identity, because every company has had the experience where they've had to respond to something, that either somebody posted something on the intranet, or somebody, a manager, told somebody that they couldn't have an accommodation, and the manager didn't know what that process was. They also didn't know where the forms were. Those kinds of things. But what we're really talking about, and where our mission generates our work, is from the perspective of not always having to respond to what's going on, but what are you investing in creating in an environment that encourages less response, or at least quickening the response time, so that people are aware of the policies, the practices, that they know what to do, and that there's a state of readiness in the corporation, not just acceptance. In terms of employee satisfaction and retention, our survey has been mentioned a number of times. In 2013, we conducted a nationwide survey with a representative sample of the American workforce, and you've heard some of those statistics, but one of the things that is also interesting to note is that for companies where their policies around accommodation and ways in which people can navigate that process are clearly known and understood, 2 in 10 employees are actually looking for another job. Like, people are going to be looking for another job, no matter how good you make it. People are going to be looking for their next opportunity. In companies where those policies are not understood, where people don't know what the process is for seeking an accommodation, they don't know who to speak to, that number doubles to 4 in 10. Of your employees are looking for another job. Because if you imagine, if you substitute any other identity for religion, imagine you're trying to figure out, what is the policy if I become pregnant and have a baby? How hard is it for me to figure that out? who gets family leave or not. If we substitute them, these are not difficult questions, but when we put the dynamic of religion in it, somehow it becomes far more complicated. Some of it has to do with the difficulty that we have with addressing religion. It's not something that's, it's not a requirement within education. It's not something that people are required to know to enter the workforce. So to a certain degree, we're all a little bit at a disadvantage. Some of us barely know what we believe, never mind the tenets of another tradition. So we're starting to a certain degree from a similar point. When we talk about recruitment and being an employer of choice when it comes to religious diversity, I can share with you that we had a client that was courting a woman for senior managing director position. She wore hijab. And she was basically being interviewed by two serious financial services companies, let's say across the street from one another. And when she chose one company over the other, the hiring director from the company she didn't choose asked her, "Why did you choose our competitors?" She said, "They're known to be more hijab friendly. And I really don't want to have to deal with that if I'm going to be working here 12 and 16 hours a day and interacting with security and that kind of thing." My question, though, becomes not just that the company is known in social media, et cetera, as hijab friendly, but is that conscious within your strategy? Have you done the actual work in exit interviews, et cetera, to figure out what is your rep on the street around religion? And what are you doing to actually foster that environment where people come seeking you as opposed to having to tell them about the accommodations that you make for them? Because really, when we're talking about religious diversity in the workplace in 2017, religious accommodations are the floor. You're supposed to do that. That's not like high level. You're supposed to provide reasonable accommodations for people unless it causes an undue burden in your workplace. So if I come in and say, I need a temple built for me, which I could do, that might cause you an undue hardship to build something just for me that the other 50,000 employees in the building are not able to use. But if I come, or a group of us come and say, we actually need a place to pray. We've been making do in the stairways and in the basement, but there are too many employees now because you are all in this diversity and inclusion kick. And now we're diverse and we need to be included. Now we're starting to work towards innovation. Does this make sense? So when we're talking about improved teamwork and collaboration, I'll share a quick story with you. The Ford Motor Company has had an interfaith network for a number of years. And in one instance, they had one of those promotions where regular people could buy Ford cars at the price that employees pay. So the interfaith network kind of took hold of this idea that they were going to spread throughout all of their chapters across the country the opportunity for their constituents and their families and friends, et cetera, to buy Ford cars at the price that Ford employees could pay. They brought in $260 million. And they did that as a collaborative. There wasn't a question about whose faith was involved, et cetera, but they, as an institution within the company, helping to not just create an inclusive environment, but to forward business goals, were able to work collaboratively toward a business goal. There are opportunities within addressing proactively religious diversity that are often unseen, and in some instances, people are leaving money on the table. Finally, in terms of client and customer relations, I think it's already been said, so I won't go into great detail about this, but in short, there was a financial services company, European-based, that was launching a savings product. And they had created all of the art, et cetera, and I think it was a piggy bank was part of the promotion. And one of the employees, so in this instance, there was no interfaith group, there was no, setup for this, but an employee actually recognizing market trends said, you may not be aware, but there is a Turkish Muslim immigrant population in Germany right now where we're about to launch this thing, and that piggy bank is not going to work. And they had run all the art, they had paid for everything, they were ready to go. What they did a second run of the art, substituted the piggy bank for a treasure chest. And so, if you will, there are opportunities that lie across industries within businesses for recognizing not just the workforce, right, and the workplace, but what's the marketplace implication for this? And to the point earlier about the armed forces, one of the things around diversity and inclusion, equity, accessibility overall, is that we're trying to create something that has never existed before. So we're not trying to go back and recreate something. In most instances, particularly when it comes to religion, religious identity, we're having conversations that we've never had before about inequity and ways in which policies have favored some over than others. So to the point that my colleague Karen brought up, the degree that you're willing to be authentic and honest about that then gives people a place to actually step into and say, yeah, I can stand for that. If people need to serve in turban or hijab and beard, if they need to, if it means that they're going to be more attentive and have my six, not a problem. But if you're just coming to me because of platitudes, I got a problem with that. Does this all make sense? Okay. So in terms of the pledge, we have been working on this project, I think, for about 3 years now. And one of the things that I think is important to distinguish, that was actually something that I had to learn and get into my thinking, is that often when we think about religious freedom, particularly from a United States context, that has meant a lot of things to a lot of different people over time. But the corporate pledge that Brian has created is rooted within the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's Article 18, and it reads as such: everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change his or her religion or belief, and freedom either alone or in community with others and in public or private to manifest his or her religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. That's what Article 18 says, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So we are not presenting something that's based solely within United States law or European accommodations. We are talking about a far broader concept of what it means to live a life where the freedom of religion and belief is understood, and as Olivia said earlier, actually walking that. Then when we say that, and even so that we all know, and because we're in the Religious Freedom Center, the whole idea of the separation of church and state, can we just get that straight, that there's an establishment clause and there's a free exercise clause. And there is no place where you are to be silenced to talk about your religion. That would actually be a break of the Establishment Clause or the Free Exercise Clause. So when we're talking about the opportunity of this pledge, we are presenting what we believe and what the Universal Declaration of Human Rights ascribes as the highest level of practice in workplaces around religion and the freedom to believe, including believing in nothing. Does this make sense? Okay. So you'll see on this screen, to some degree you might be able to see, it's a little small colors of companies that have already signed on to the pledge. And one thing that's important to know is that to complete the corporate religious diversity assessment tool, you do not have to sign the pledge. They, if you will, inform one another, but they are not required. You don't have to fill out the pledge. But I believe that you may be inspired to fill out the pledge after you've done the tool to see what the opportunities are for growth within your company, and certainly within addressing this particular dimension of diversity and inclusion. There are 4 criteria that are made up of the pledge: non-discrimination and non-harassment on the basis of religion or belief. All of these are, I believe, in your seat. Religious accommodation and inclusion. You'll notice on this screen that this is a different order than what's presented at your seat. And if you will, this actually raises the bar with each criteria. And I'm give you like a takeaway. So one thing that some people have been concerned about is this a competition? Like if I fill out this tool, are my scores going to be displayed, and is Diversity Inc. going to write a profile on me, and all of that kind of stuff. So this is not a competition. Say it with me. This is not a competition, right? And none of the things that you submit will be shared publicly, but we will be able to actually talk about trends that we see. And we will be able to report on what are people paying attention to and what's kind of still in the blind spot, laying track for what's possible. Because here's the thing, unless you know something I don't know, your diversity, inclusion, equity, and accessibility plan doesn't end on December 31st, 2019. You have plans that go out over the next few years, and this tool, I believe, will help you to schedule, think about ways in which you want to incorporate and address religious diversity if you're not already at work on that. Okay, so our goals definitely to provide a solid framework. So in many instances, you know, we're bringing about 20 years of experience to the corporate pledge to actually figure out what is that pathway, what would show kind of like a gold standard experience of walking the walk of religious freedom as defined by the United Nations. But there wasn't a framework before this. They were all kind of elusive, or they were located in particular pockets, or the conversation was solely limited to whether a company was providing reasonable accommodations, because that's what the United States Constitution supports. Now we actually have a solid framework for not thinking just about compliance, but actually what does it mean to be a corporate citizen supporting the freedom of religion and belief in the places in which you work? How do we then begin to build that bridge between not just diversity, equity, and inclusion, but to bring in corporate sustainability, corporate responsibility, and how does all of that lay foundation for workplaces where people feel respected regardless of their religious beliefs or not? So, you know, we've had a number of people review all of the work that we've done, and there were questions as to, you know, people don't feel good when they fail a test. So, you know, are people gonna like not do it because the bar is too high? And, you know, we were of the opinion, my colleagues and I, that without a high bar, then what you do is run the risk of letting people think that everything's okay and just kind of maintaining the status quo. And our mission is to combat religious prejudice. So we're interested in workplaces that have policies, practices, training for managers, executive level support and training of the executive level, and companies that are responsive to their marketplaces. That's what we're in the game for. So as a result, the bar is a little high. Everybody's gonna do great through Section 2. And I'll show you what that looks like in one moment. The other thing too is that what gets measured gets managed. This we know. And so this is an opportunity internally within your company with the appropriate stakeholders from various departments to begin to actually measure your readiness and the ways in which you're proactively addressing religious diversity, to consider the ways that you might want to move that needle forward, but also to be mindful there may be places that you're not ready to move forward yet, but it is at least now a conscious conversation as opposed to a fleeting thought. So you'll have something that can actually measure reliably your activity around addressing religious diversity. Some of the outcomes I've already mentioned. Each company that completes the corporate religious diversity assessment will receive a report of what you've entered, and you'll be able to begin to map out future priorities. We'll also be reporting on the trends that we see, but I think that this is something that then you can come back to. So you actually may do your corporate religious diversity assessment in 2019, set some goals, then you can come back to it in 2021 and actually input that data again and say, how have we moved the needle? Are we actually moving in the direction that we originally sought? What are the factors that are changing our direction, or just having it be a conscious conversation as opposed to always reacting to potentially bad things? So just to give you a sense of what you'll encounter in terms of getting started with the CRDA, I'll go to the shorthand now, Corporate Religious Diversity Assessment. It is built on a 100-point scale, and this is, again, an internal self-assessment. So no public information will be made available about your participation on the online tool. Say it with me now, self-assessment, internal. Right, so we're not going to be sharing like so-and-so, oh, did you see so-and-so is number 35 on the list? Like that's not going to happen. So on the top of the page, in terms of how to negotiate the site, there are 4 concepts that make up the freedom of religion and belief and the corporate pledge. And so each of those have been broken out into questions with scores appropriate for each statement in each section. At the bottom will be a guide to let you know where you are in the process. So you'll always be able to see what concept you're working on. And then you also have at the bottom, it'll tell you section 1 of concept 1, et cetera. So you always kind of know where you are. There is a back button. Wait a minute, just go back for 1 second. So this is all of the information when you land. You'll also see a great deal, let me go over here. So you'll also see on each section, you'll have instructions on how to complete that section and what are the necessary materials. Now, those materials you may need to get or involve someone from another department, and this is accessible once you've created your profile in the beginning. You can share the login with others who need to input information. So it doesn't have to be just you. So you don't get to have just one more project for yourself, as much as I know you want another project. Okay, then in terms of the setup, so there are subsections, as you can see, within each category, within each concept, and users, you can assign your company with the appropriate points for each question. So here's the thing, this is a self-assessment. And I think about it, so I'm in the midst of kind of like a weight loss thing. My doctor had a conversation with me and said, things are going to go we're going to have a different conversation in 3 months if some things don't change. So I relate to this self-assessment the way I relate to my scale. Now, when I get on my scale and it tells me how much I weigh, I can either write down what the scale says or I can write down what I think. So I'm suggesting that as part of this self-assessment, you actually tell the truth about what's going on, because no one's gonna know, right? There's no one to impress. There's a great deal of information to gain. And in that information, there may be impressive things that you find, but you do yourself no favor by giving yourself points for things that you have not done, or that don't really exist. Like if you have here the words like kinda and maybe in your head while you're doing the assessment, probably err on the side of no. Like we shouldn't give ourselves any points for that right now. Or at least put in, maybe at the lower edge of the points. In some instances, you'll be there is a particular amount, it's either 1 point or 2 point for answering a question. In some areas, there's a scale. And it depends on how much you've actually moved in a particular area. So you get to guide yourself in terms of how to assign those points. You'll have running tallies, so in each section, you'll see how many points, and at the bottom of each section, you'll have a total for that section. That'll be very clear. You can always save it and come back to it. So as with any kind of assessment, if you've ever done like the implicit bias test, you may want to, you would love to kind of step away from that and be like, oh my God, I'm so prejudiced. Oh my God, what's going to happen to me? Like, you'd love to be able to take a step back from that. So similarly, with the CRDA, you will always be able to save information that you've entered and come back to it and you may also need to reach someone in another department for information that you don't have on hand. So again, you can save all the information and share it over time. And then this last section, what is this last section? That's just the save for later button. So you can always go save it for later and come back. Okay, and then as you go through, each section will turn from red to green as you fully complete that section. And then when you come to the end, you'll be given a final tally. Let me just shrink this down. You'll be given a final tally. You'll receive an email with all of your responses that you've entered. And if you like, there is an opportunity to have Tanenbaum review your responses. So here's the thing again, this is like going to the store for yourself and you try something on and you think it's cute, but you didn't bring your best friend with you. Where your best friend will say, put that down. That's not for you, that doesn't look good on you. So we're happy to review your submission, give you our feedback on your submission, and if you wanted to do deeper work in terms of a policy review, then you would make available to us the things that you use to score yourself, and we would give you recommendations on how you might want to move forward or how to create a strategy over time. We created a corporate membership program about 7 years ago, and this is the kind of work we do with our corporate members on a daily basis, which is help them to strategize not just in the immediate, but over time, what are the ways in which you're going to work toward creating an inclusive workforce around the identity of religion? So here is this is the URL for the Corporate Religious Diversity Assessment, crdatool.com, and it is live now. So everyone is free to begin using it. It's crdatool.com. And of course, this information will be made available immediately after the presentation is over. And with that said, my formal presentation is over, and I think now Paul and I are making ourselves available for questions. And thank you so much for your time.